The rise of the tech priests began in the aftermath of the Age of Strife, the devastating period of galactic turmoil and planetary isolation that saw humanity reach a point of complete cultural collapse. Mars, during the Dark Age of technology, was then home to humanity's most ancient and advanced technological vaults. It was the very centre of human knowledge, but by the period known as the Age of Strife it had become transformed into a bastion of scientific and industrial might for whatever remained of humanity. The tech priests who existed upon Mars, and who had become, as a result of the circumstances which saw the collapse of Mars, concentrated into a religious cult, and this cult was devoted to the worship of the machine god. These tech priests and their cult constituted what was known as the Mechanicum of Mars. And if you are new to learning about the Mechanicum and the Mechanicus, then I would point you to some of my previous videos. The tech priests established vast forge cities and manufactoria, creating not only powerful weapons but vehicles, infrastructure, and all manner of machinery which was required for the very survival of humanity. Their expertise and resources would become absolutely critical to the success of the Emperor of Mankind's Great Crusade, and in exchange for their support, he granted the Mechanicum the rare privilege of societal autonomy and the singular control over Mars, thus cementing their status as a crucially empowered ally within the newly emergent Imperium of Mankind. This partnership propelled the Mechanicum to unparalleled heights of influence and power, making them near indispensable for the Imperium's war efforts and expansion. Yet this power was very dangerous, for the Mechanicum never truly trusted the Emperor. He was the Omnisire, but not all were ready to believe that he was the singular being they had sought and worshipped for so long. The first cracks in the relationship had emerged. In time, these would split deep into the cult to become the Schism of Mars, and within the Mechanicum this would lay the foundations of what would later be defined as the Dark Mechanicum. Meanwhile, the loyalist tech priests upon Terra would diverge into the cult Mechanicus. Fast forward to the contemporary era, and in the tumultuous aftermath of the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Dark Mechanicum has become increasingly aggressive. They seize opportunities amid the galaxy's chaos, and with the Imperium divided by the Great Rift, renegade tech priests seek to exploit the weakened defences and the fractured command structures of formerly impenetrable Imperial bastions. Now they seek their destruction to expand their influence and power alongside other renegades and heretics. Key figures have emerged in this time, driving forward this new wave of traitor aggression, among them Vashtor the Archifane, a powerful demon engineer who brought forbidden knowledge and arcane technology to the Dark Mechanicum. His expertise in creating horrific war machines and corrupting sacred technology has notably intensified assaults upon loyalist worlds. And the Great Rift is problematic enough for the Imperium, but the prospect of the Dark Mechanicum returning with a newfound aggression toward humanity is deeply troubling, for their horrific nature was already evident before they even retreated into the warp, and in many documented instances since. While those of the Mechanicus hold some restraint in their apathy toward human flesh, the Dark Mechanicum have entirely embraced a complete disregard for human morality and the sanctity of the human form. They conduct gruesome experiments merging flesh and machine in grotesque amalgamations that serve as both soldiers and abominations. Although in saying that sounds a lot like the Mechanicus, but anyway, details. What you won't see in the Mechanicus are the warp-twisted creations like hell brutes and demon engines whose power is fueled by the tormented souls of their victims, screaming eternally from within their metal shells. Such machines of horror, under Vashtor's guidance and supported by the Dark Mechanicum, have launched devastating raids upon Forge worlds, capturing valuable resources and enslaving skilled tech priests to their cause. Their endeavours grow ever bolder, with incursions rarely seen before penetrating deep into Imperial space. An immediate sign of the presence of the Mechanicum is always their use in spreading mechanical corruption through insidious scrap code and chaos-tainted relics. They twist once pure technologies into instruments of confusion, chaos, and horror, infecting machines with chaotic energies that turn them against their creators. For the Imperium, the contemporary period has marked a significant and notable escalation in the Dark Mechanicum's activity and their potential overarching goals. Troublingly, the Great Rift appears to have marked a new era of technological heresy and relentless tech war. This, combined with their disregard for the sanctity of humanity and life in general, leaves the Dark Mechanicum as one of the most feared and reviled factions throughout the galaxy. I often see it said, or am directly asked, why was the Horus Heresy so critical to the background of the Imperium or 40k in general? The implication being you could just jump in at the current period for the Imperium in M41 and pick up the other details as you go. It's not completely untrue to presume or suggest this, and as I always say, the best place to start in 40k is anywhere, because so much of the lore leads to tangents and adjacent questions. It's best to not worry too much, and eventually everything will start to connect. At the same time, the heresy was one of the most pivotal periods for humanity in terms of 40k. It framed and established everything that would occur throughout the next 10,000 years of human history, and for that reason, it really should not be ignored. But does that mean you have to read the entire library of heresy books before you even start learning about contemporary 40k? Forget about the stuff that happened in between. Well, no. But for context, let's briefly consider the fall of the Mechanicum. It all began at the outset of the Horus Heresy. A trusted Mechanicum representative was sent to Mars to secure the support of its fabricated general for the War Master's rebellion. Remembering, this was a different time to M41 and also tech priests. So it wasn't a question that led to said messenger being immediately executed on the spot. Also, remembering that the Mechanicum and its leaders in this time were a little more hesitant to fully embrace the Emperor, and at the very least more skeptical due to past disappointments with the Emperor. So this meant that during the latter stages of the Great Crusade, the Mechanicum's fabricated general already questioned what tangible benefits could be offered by a continued alliance with the Emperor. It made sense initially, but now that they had been quite successful with the Great Crusade, why did they need to continue this alliance with the Imperium? Why couldn't they just go off and basically do whatever they want? The representative explained that much had changed since the Emperor's departure, with new powers emerging and shifting allegiances taking place. Most of all, Horus, the War Master, promised to be a steadfast ally to Mars if the fabricated general pledged loyalty and manufacturing capabilities to the traitor's cause, and of course that small detail of requiring full suppression of any dissent among loyalist tech priests to ensure a smooth path to supremacy in the Sol system. The fabricated general noted that the Mechanicum had already prioritized supplies for the War Master's favoured fleets, but the tech priests were far from being won over by wild promises with very little to back it up, even more reluctant to trade one autocrat for another. Nonetheless, the messenger assured them that the War Master would restore the Martian Empire's former glory, withdraw non-Mechanicum forces from Forge Worlds, and provide access and unfettered exploration of lost secrets and ancient technologies. Horus now had the attention of the fabricated general, but not his loyalty. For this, it would require a pledge to allow unrestricted research into entirely forbidden technologies and the priceless protocols to unlock the vaults of Moravec, which were said to contain unfathomably dangerous warp-tainted knowledge and technology. Salivating through his breathing pipe and Vox grill, the Mechanicum leader greedily accepted. This saw the current fabricated general of Mars join forces with the War Master, Horus. Such support was of course invaluable, and one could argue it even enabled the viability of the heresy itself, for without providing advanced technology, technical and logistical support to aid the traitors, it's very questionable if they could have reached Terra at all, or if they did, how viable they would have been at that point in time. But when the repository was opened, it unleashed a tsunami of tech corruption that spread throughout the forged cities and temples on Mars as scrap code. A chaos-infected digital virus which infested the Mechanicum's computer systems, causing complete and widespread havoc. And this event was really the cover they needed for the traitor Mechanicum to kind of break out into the open. But even then, whilst initial acts of treachery occurred, the Fabricator General couldn't declare open war without a pretext. He and his renegade allies used the disruption from the scrap code attack to consolidate their forces and then eliminate any and all opponents through both sabotage and just straight up assassination. But although the situation was very chaotic, it was maybe not quite as simple as just gunning down anybody you didn't like, but it wasn't far off this. Then, to further support the War Master, the Mechanicum also granted him the constructed battleship Furious Abyss in a secret orbital shipyard near Jupiter. This was an extremely heavily armoured and uniquely powerful warship designed to withstand planetary assaults and was planned to annihilate the Ultramarines Legion as a key part of the War Master's wider plan for total domination and the destruction of the Emperor's new Imperium. Upon completion, the shipyard was also destroyed to ensure its secrecy, leaving no survivors and resulting in the loss of a critically valuable technological site. Now, such losses were common and catastrophic during the heresy, which is again why it's noteworthy to remember just how much of the technology, even in this time, was far in advance of what is available to the Imperium in M41, and losses such as this shipyard cast a long shadow that reaches as far as the era Indomitus. In the aftermath of the events upon Mars, things were out in the open. The Mechanicum now being openly referred to as Dark Mechanicum, they could be seen as nothing less than traitors, and in the eyes of the rising Adeptus Mechanicus marooned on Terra, those upon Mars had played an obvious and crucially collaborative role in the heresy by giving their full support to the traitors. It was as much the disgrace of the Fabricator General Kelbor Hal as it was the War Master that both were captivated by the possibilities of Chaos power. But for the Mechanicum, it was potentially those promises of freedom from the Emperor's restrictions and opportunities for true empire building of their own that sold them in terms of loyalties. As was the case with so many worlds in this time, it was very chaotic, and this meant that some Forge worlds provided weapons and war machines for the traitors' cause, others to the loyalists. Perhaps though history would judge most harshly the Forge worlds who rationalised some way to either step out of the situation and rise above it, wait to see how this whole heresy thing played out, or the many renegade Forge worlds who decided that they would dangerously play both sides. Unsurprisingly, in the aftermath of the heresy, the loyalists did not look particularly favourable upon those who had not sided with them. In the aftermath of the War Master's death during the Siege of Terra, the Loyalist Mechanicus forces would drive the Dark Mechanicum from Mars and, much like the other traitors, force them to flee into the Eye of Terror in the period referred to as the Great Scouring. Here they would remain for the coming 10,000 years of human history. Unsurprisingly, it is the Adeptus Mechanicus who reserve their deepest hatred for those now only known as the Dark Mechanicum, for they betrayed not only the Emperor during the Horus Heresy, but those of Mars itself, the destruction and the catastrophic loss of knowledge that they place above all other things, and which the traitors caused upon Mars and other war zones, was incalculable, and left an indelible stain upon the souls of the cult Mechanicum. Yet even now in the contemporary time, surviving Dark Mechanicum members who found refuge with traitor legions and who perhaps still remain hidden within the darkest corners of the Imperium persist. This is where they practice their dark activities and are entirely consumed by their hatred for the Imperium for millennia. The Dark Mechanicum, as it has existed until the most recent period of M41, has remained operational within the Eye of Terror and other hidden regions of the galaxy. Anytime they do appear, not dissimilarly to those such as the Drakari, their expeditions and incursions are greatly feared, as they are notorious for their horrific experiments and support of heretical Astartes. They are responsible for the creation of forbidden psychosonic weapons, such as used by the Emperor's children. They collaborate in the worst possible activities of the traitors, such as atrocities committed by Fabius Bile or the Iron Warriors. They employ technology that birthed the fearsome Obliterators, and they reside within their hellish Forge worlds, ruled over by cyber-demonic overlords. The Dark Mechanicum endlessly continue to produce weapons and munitions which arm the Chaos forces and fuel the likes of the dreaded Black Crusades. Of those renegades, who were among some of the first to be branded as heretics by the Imperium, most fled to the Eye of Terror to escape Imperial reprisals. However, the retreat to the Eye of Terror was extraordinarily disorganised. This meant that often they were cut off and forced into quick hiding, the alternative being brutal scouring from existence. And so this meant that many pockets of renegades would occupy hidden regions of space, strange anomalous areas beyond even the reach of the Emperor's light. Places on the periphery of the Imperial Empire where entire civilizations could rise and fall without ever encountering the wider Imperium. Here is where renegade Astartes, non-conforming Imperials, and the Dark Mechanicum persist. Such pockets contain the worst enemies of the Imperium, and so it rests upon the likes of the Inquisition and the Astartes to discover and destroy them. The Dark Mechanicum commonly operates in these varied regions, and they often form extended clans who share their dark knowledge through a long-established hierarchy. These heretics often wield a formidable understanding of technologies and local warp space conditions that would be far outside the standard operational parameters of the sanctioned Mechanicus. And it is through this broader knowledge that they're able to partake in activities that trade and create dangerous liaisons which enable them to support malicious activities. The sects of the Dark Mechanicum are not just peripherally problematic toward the Imperium though. They are a significantly active threat, and the discovery or even the mere suggestion of their existence should be enough to trigger deployment of Imperial authorities to investigate, capture, or eliminate them. Within this fairly non-standardized Dark Mechanicum hierarchy though, Hell Forge worlds occupy a central horrific position. These worlds lie partly within the material universe and usually partly within the warp, and they're dominated by demon machines and abhorrent industries. They're dark, nightmarish worlds consumed by total pollution, resource exploitation extremes, not to mention the pure hellish distortions of the warp and chaos. Demons roam freely, and mortals are either fully committed chaos champions or slave workers from captured ships and raided planets. But as these worlds lie largely beyond the Inquisition's reach, Hellforge worlds are sanctuaries for Chaos worshippers. They flood to them, because the worlds themselves are remnants of the Mechanicum who once followed Horus during the heresy. This is where they once supported that uprising from, and they remain devoted to producing weapons and armaments for the traitor legions' long war against the Imperium. To this end, countless millions are enslaved in vast, labyrinthine forge fanes, overseen by half-demonic machine creatures who, unlike the Mechanicus, have long abandoned all aspects of their humanity and live lives that are entirely unconstrained by any boundaries or laws. But there are those who are not so entirely consumed by chaos. More experimental, explorative members of the Mechanicum on hellish forge worlds trade and sell their unholy creations to the highest bidder. That could be warlords, demagogues, chaos sorcerers, or even demon princes. But their currency is the raw materials they require to continue the exploration and expansion of knowledge. Very often this means flesh and souls, which seems somewhat bizarre for a faction that discards the weakness of the human form, but while they shun the flesh, they're also quite satisfied to use it as a disposable workforce. Which again sounds a little like the Mechanicus. Anyway, the planets themselves, as you would expect, miserable, bleak places, shrouded in oppressive dark clouds from towering stacks that spew endless ash and toxic smoke. The surface is obscured by continuous layers of factories, burning and forging without pause. Waste mountains surround the forged cities, inhabited by scavenging gangs of escaped workers. Between this, robed figures adorned with mechadendrites and metallic limbs move purposely through the industrial wasteland like some 40k scrap heap challenge. Runes and glyphs of the ruinous powers mark the walls and their bodies. Heretics bear these symbols upon branded flesh, and deep inside the depths of the forges, the stench of burning blood and scorched flesh hangs heavily in the air, mixed with pollutants and promethium. Everywhere you may have once found the sacred cog Mechanicum is now replaced by leering metal skulls in circlets of spiked teeth. Hull Forge worlds are the unfettered representations of the Dark Mechanicum, for they exist to serve the completely unrestrained pursuit of technological heresy, and as such, they continue to fuel the unending threat facing the Imperium. But those of the Dark Mechanicum do not exist singularly on these ancient Forge worlds. Despite the dangers, some renegades will infiltrate Imperial space, fully knowing they face torture and execution by the Inquisition should they be captured or detected. Understandably, the Imperium remains ever vigilant to any infiltrators by agents or forces of the Dark Mechanicum. But their schism from the Imperium also enables one of the most interesting aspects of the Dark Mechanicum. That is that similarly due to the traitor legions, whilst technically having something approaching leadership, more broadly they lack a central authority or unified belief system. Which was, of course, one of the core reasons for their breaking with the Emperor's rule in the first place. As such, heretics are instead fragmented into countless fiefdoms and Forge World dominions. Each is ruled by a powerful fallen magi, and these factions often will war among themselves or remain isolated from all others. This has meant that, broadly speaking, their ideological focus is far more varied than those within the Mechanicus. Because in contrast, a heretic ignores any and all former restrictions that may have been placed upon them. They delve into Xenos technology, archaeotech from the Dark Age of technology, and anything related to the manipulation of the warp. They might even develop entirely new technologies, combining components in forbidden ways to produce the ultimate tech heresy, innovation. Some of their number may even go so far as to share their tools and secrets with those who are untrained in the mysteries of the Machine God, which is unthinkable for the Mechanicus. But in the eyes of the Dark Mechanicum, they no longer believe that any information, experiment or device should be ignored, constrained or restricted. It should be open. Their focus is often very skewed towards technologies the Mechanicus taught them to historically avoid, with that particular interest in developing warp-based or AI experimentation. Knowing this from the perspective of the Imperial Inquisition, heretics represent a grave and insidious threat. So fallen tech priests are not only the creators of destructive world-ending tools, but also they are masters of cybernetic body modification, which goes far beyond the somewhat restrained practices seen within the Mechanicus. They will often add extensive experimental cybernetic and even biological enhancements that grant them superior survival and combat abilities. And while obviously the Mechanicus share these, those of the Dark Mechanicum enable modifications far more frequently, and those which also bear the corrupting mark of chaos, which makes them far more formidable than even the highest ranking Magos of the Mechanicus. Heretics innovate continuously, they draw power from the warp, and are quite happy to employ summoned warp entities in their experimentations. They explore concepts like artificial intelligence, memory transference, and soul preservation within their devices. And it is this almost insatiably relentless pursuit of new ideas and forbidden knowledge which fuels their recklessness, which now that I say it all out loud, does continue to sound quite like Belisarius' core. Anyway, for many tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum, they're so consumed by their personal goals that they reach levels of obsession, even addiction. And this is such a powerful drive within them that they might undertake near to impossible missions in raiding Imperial strongholds and collaborate with the ruinous powers in the slim hope of achieving their goals and unlocking ancient Dark Age of technology constructs. For most, the price to achieve their objectives can never be too high. But unlike their traitor Astartes, few heretics are able to achieve the status of an elevated chaos form, such as a demon prince. But this is largely due to their unfocused relationship and approach to the warp. Because unlike those Astartes who have fully embraced chaos, but even down to those who worship in its undivided form, the Mechanicum have a far more disparate following toward it, with some who may strongly engage with the entities of the warp, but there are others who ignore it entirely, operating with very minimal distinction than they did before technically falling into darkness. And this is often so much so that they may even be able to still engage with the Imperium and members of the Mechanicus and go fully undetected. At worst, their outlook may be seen as a little extreme, maybe stepping over the grey line or even fundamentalist, but it still is enough to be tolerated. So while few among the heretics will reach any kind of enlightened or empowered chaos form, of those who do continue to spread their chaos-tainted technology across the galaxy, many will end up becoming components of their own horrific creations. Because their original bodies and personalities are often obliterated in an ironic, albeit often poetic, ending, which seems to be the best most among the Dark Mechanicum could hope for, to become one with the machine, as it were. From the perspective of the Imperium, and again specifically the Mechanicus, Dark Mechanicum heretics are a perpetual and escalating threat. The weapons and experimental concepts they seek to empower themselves with are an ultimate perversion of technological advancement, and something which potentially poses one of the greatest threats to the Imperium in M41, and which consequently must be exterminated with the most extreme prejudice possible. I think many agree that we are soon to see the return of the Dark Mechanicum to a more active and open role in the galaxy of M41, both in the lore and the tabletop, which, for one thing, has me thinking of a new Rule the Galaxy video featuring today's faction focus. So the return and representation on the tabletop itself has been speculated upon endlessly, but the aggressive return of the Dark Mechanicum to the Imperium Nihilus, with the likes of Vastor making an appearance, would herald a true era of escalation for the forces of the Imperium. It would be a new age of unprecedented terror and technological corruption, as if things weren't bad enough already. Of course, this all comes down to the Cicatrix Maledictum, of course, the foremost threat facing the Imperium, because as the Great Rift splits the galaxy, renegade Astartes and tech priests alike, having been for so long exiled to the Eye of Terror and other hidden regions, now finally have an opportunity to exploit the chaos across the entire galaxy and reconnect with pockets of traitors who seek to connect and reassert their malign influence. Raiding forces begin emerging from hellish forge worlds, some that were formerly deep within the warp and now find themselves on the cusp of Imperial space. The Dark Mechanicum brings with them all you would expect: war machines of diabolical heretic design, nightmarish warp creations that would be impossible to construct and fuel with demons in real space were they to be bound by the stupid laws of reality, and of course the deployment of many other forms of forbidden knowledge. Unlike those within the Imperium, the Dark Mechanicum arsenal includes all manner of weapons that are outlawed or used sparingly, like atomics or the dreaded Life Eater virus, advanced plasma weapons, even Xenos technologies. All are capable of causing massive destruction and overwhelming Imperial defences. And just to be completely clear, it's not that the Imperium would never use certain tools if they were pushed to. We well know that the Imperium rarely has too many qualms about using extraordinarily destructive technology. It's just that the Dark Mechanicum is far more likely to go in hard from day one and not use nightmare weapons as a last resort. They would also bring to the field bioengineered horrors such as murder golems, homunculites and chimerics to act as terrifying shock troops, spreading fear and chaos. Slaver parasites could subvert Imperial control from within, while massive warp-distorted titans wield all manner of world-breaking adaptations to overwhelm their Imperial counterparts through sheer destructive power. And this would only be made worse if the heretics used creations such as the Silica Animus or true artificial intelligences. In a truly catastrophic worst-case scenario, they could even resurrect the dreaded Iron Men, or at least reconstituted equivalents, fielding autonomous adaptive war machines, rendering traditional Imperial tactics obsolete. The dark fusion of technology and warp energy could also create demon engines and warp-based weapons unseen before and capable of unleashing devastating effects and widespread madness among populations. The possibilities are truly endless, which is in fact half the problem in itself. The Dark Mechanicum's presence in the Imperium Nihilus would be immediately felt through coordinated assaults on key Imperial worlds, attacks that were not just brute force, but used highly disruptive standard heretic tactics in deploying corrupted scrap code into crippling planetary defences and spreading digital contagion. Then comes the heavy-hitting, zero-restraint weaponry powered by warp energies and bound demonic entities. Nuclear strikes hitting Imperial bastions, and devastating seismic weapons from the Dark Age of technology that crack into the planet's crust itself, bringing down fortifications as if they were sandcastles. Loyalist forces unprepared for such blasphemous technology would collapse quickly. Supporting heretic Astartes would also move in to break apart remnants of defenders wielding advanced war gear of the Dark Mechanicum, paired with their demonic enhancements, significantly bolstering their effectiveness in battle. For any difficult sticking points or the dug-in heavily armed defenders, they're going to be left to be purged by heretic war engines, be those corrupted titans or swarms of cybernetic abominations who overwhelm and lay waste to entire hive cities. For there are unlikely to be any Imperial reinforcements. Nihilus is a territory already isolated and struggling under the weight of the Great Rift, but now they face an ever-present threat from chaos and such dark forges. Because the Dark Mechanicum exploits their ability to innovate without moral or ethical constraint, and this makes them not only particularly dangerous, but ravenous for worlds they descend upon in terms of devouring and scavenging any materials of value, leaving behind only barren, scoured landscapes of ruin and despair. As noted earlier, the Dark Mechanicum are driven by this unrestrained technological thirst, and to that end they do not have any significant overarching leadership. They're comprised of various heretic factions. So let's just consider a couple of these to gain a better picture of just what broadly the Dark Mechanicum are all about. The Apostles of the Blind King, for example, notorious for their actions during the Clusiad War, where they harnessed ancient Dark Age of technology artifacts to create supernova from living suns. They alterated constellations and purged entire systems. Their ability to demonstrate these galaxy-altering scales of destructive capability, if such technologies were more broadly employed or this cult revived, it could devastate the Imperium's infrastructure, using their weapons to annihilate key star systems and entry points, cripple supply lines and create widespread panic, leading to an inevitable spiral of destabilization. Then there are the followers known as the Children of Rhine, who focus on a specific archmagos. They utilize so-called false men, machines who resemble heavily augmented tech priests, to disseminate their heretical technology and ideas. Typically, their infiltrators could sabotage Imperial facilities, spread misinformation, corrupt loyalist tech priests, erode the Imperium's own technological base from within, and by replacing key personnel, the Children of Rhine could create confusion, mistrust within the Adeptus Mechanicus itself, leading to internal purges and generally the weakening of the Imperium's technological capabilities and its infrastructure. This internal strife would cause a breakdown in the maintenance of vital systems, the supply of defences, and leave the Imperium considerably vulnerable to external attacks. The Logicians are an organised alliance of heretic factions. They seek to overthrow the Imperium's oppressive structures through technological process. In their pursuit of power and advanced weaponry, they're supported by a network of mercantile interests and power-hungry nobles. As such, this makes them a persistent and very well-resourced threat, because their broader and quite considerably high goal is to return to the mythic power of the Dark Age of technology by using their resources to destabilize and challenge the Adeptus Mechanicus and Imperial authority. The Logicians find their inspiration in a forbidden heretical text called The Defense of the Future. This text has been banned for many millennia, but they favour the advancement of mankind through progress in the acquisition of technology, because they believe they should cast off the oppression of entities such as the Ministorum and larger figures such as Guilliman and the High Lords of Terror. They believe the Emperor and all the bureaucracy of the Imperium has smothered those of Mars from finding their way back to the powers of the Dark Age of technology. And they are one of the examples of these sects who hold no real interest in chaos itself. They don't use demonic forces, they don't have broadly apocalyptic agendas, but they are extremely cruel and apathetic in their pursuit of their goals, and they seek to achieve a return to humanity's zenith by any means necessary, which would be extraordinarily dangerous were they able to break in, access, undermine the strength of the Mechanicus. On the decaying world of Sinofia, the followers of Amicus Toll have corrupted local infrastructures and the machine cult, spreading heresy and decay. For the Sinofian machine cult is as corrupt as the manufactories and spires it once maintained. The creation of the apostasic matrix, electro-staves which scourge minds and souls, which, if scaled up, could be used to create widespread paranoia and fear throughout entire systems. Individuals could no longer trust their own thoughts or those of their comrades. They would feel generally frustrated, more unhappy, reduced patience with others. And although these seem very passive and minimal things, when broadly implemented, it could be used by agents or as a form of preemptive psychological warfare to weaken the morale of Imperial forces, which in turn would lead to desertions and defections. By the time any Chaos-aligned forces arrived at a world, they would find it already in disarray, barely able to defend themselves, not entirely dissimilar to the prior Nexus or Tyranids with the Shadow in the Warp. The creations of the apostasic matrix was even favoured by some radical inquisitors who discovered this to be a powerful addition to their interrogations. This would turn captured soldiers and civilians into mindless followers, or could also be used in interrogating and breaking the spirits of loyalist leaders. But there is of course one question which always persists. Would it ever be possible to unify various sects of the heretics? Because in combining these factions to a unified Dark Mechanicum force, it would cause the emergence of a new and extremely capable enemy. Due to their diverse abilities, engaging through highly aggressive, multifaceted battles against the Imperium, this would be a highly challenging threat to counter. We could imagine it begins with stellar manipulation by the Apostles of the Blind King to isolate and destroy key star systems, then infiltration and sabotage by the Children of Rhine to weaken the Imperium's technological base, Empiric engineers warp machines creating chaos and instability as the logicians advance weapons and organizational skills. Their corrupting breaches into Mechanicus infrastructure would launch in coordination with tech priests who wield augmented ranks of enhanced warriors, whilst on peripheral Imperial Guard Bastion worlds, mind-scouring devices demoralize and corrupt Imperial defenders, making them completely ineffective. The Dark Mechanicum would be an extremely difficult new enemy to handle due to the variable nature of their weapons and tactics that they would seek to deploy. Additionally, it would be a war not only fought on battlefields, but also within the fabric of the Imperium's society and technology, leading to a conflict that could potentially bring about a new age of strife. The progressive stacking of attacks upon vulnerabilities would be exploited by other heretic groups and supporting Astartes and cult armies, creating essentially a self-perpetuating cycle of collapse. The Imperium would be forced to divert resources to address their internal threats and bolster protections against systems that they ordinarily do not have to be concerned about, thereby weakening its ability to respond to external system invasions. This perpetual state of crisis would surely also steadily erode the faith of the populace in the Imperium's ability to protect them, leading then to wider rebellions, maybe even those among the Mechanicus and Forge worlds, especially among those who already like to keep the Imperium at arm's length, which would begin to see them switch sides, like for example Zao Arkad. Cumulatively, we would see the eventual fragmentation of the Imperium itself. For the beleaguered defenders of the Imperium, the Dark Mechanicum represents an existential threat. Their aggressive resurgence is a clarion call of the long war's continuation, a grim reminder that the forces of chaos are relentless and ever evolving. The Imperium Nihilus must now brace for an onslaught of heretical ingenuity and demonic power as the Dark Mechanicum seeks to reshape and retake the galaxy in the image of their own twisted masters. In the minds of many Dark Mechanicum heretics, there is no greater purpose in life than serving the cause of the advancement of technology and knowledge. Any sacrifice, therefore, is justified in the pursuit of this end, because to them, The boundaries of morality and humanity are but trivial obstacles to overcome in their greater quest for ultimate understanding and power. They view the Imperium's adherence to tradition and dogma as a considerable hindrance to true progress. They believe that only through unrestrained experimentation and the embrace of forbidden sciences will the true potential of humanity, and indeed the galaxy itself, be unlocked. The tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum will see this end goal fulfilled no matter the cost. In service to this relentless pursuit, they have developed technologies and practices which pose unimaginable risks to humanity of the Imperium. In the contemporary age, humanity itself is by any measure already at the brink of a new age of strife. And if the Dark Mechanicum entered into a widespread outright war alongside the other horrors from the warp, their technological abominations and outlawed experimentations, paired with whatever discoveries they have made from the dark age of technology, would surely destabilize, corrupt, and cause the structural implosions that constitute the very fabric of the Imperium.